Welcome back to the Oscar Project Podcast, the show where I discuss Oscar-nominated films year by year. I am your host, Jonathan Eacherberg, and today I'll be discussing the 1930 film The Rogue Song with my friend Helen Cox, who writes Movies of Note newsletter. Helen, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And before we get going today, tell listeners a little bit about who you are and where they can find your work online.
I'm a little bit of a resurrected film critic. In 2010, I founded my own film magazine, which I ran for 5 years here in the UK. And then I decided that I wanted to write novels instead, which I've been doing for about the last decade. But I really missed writing about film, and it just so happened that Substack came along. So I've been writing about films there instead and really enjoying it and getting back to that. So you can find all of my film writing at substack.com/helenography.
And before we get into the Rogue Song, I do, as we always do, want to update our place in history. It's been about a month or so since the last film that we talked about was released back at the end of December, right after Christmas. So we've welcomed in the new year, welcomed in a new decade, and of course, we're still dealing with the fallout from the great stock market crash of 1929. So I'll go through some of the history notes that I had. It feels like some of the last couple episodes, we haven't had a whole lot of names in terms of notable births and passings in those times, but we have a whole bunch that I found in this period.
There's also some things going on in the Soviet Union which are kind of strangely relevant to the film.
Yes, absolutely. So real quick, first on the births. So December 29th, Susie Garrett played Sherry's grandmother, Betty Johnson, on the Punky Brewster television series. January 3rd, Robert, I'm not sure if it's Loggia or Loggia, Oscar-nominated actor, best known for playing, he was the old man, I think he's the boss in Big, the owner of the toy store. And then January 10th, Roy E. Disney, nephew to Walt Disney, and he would eventually take over the Disney company for many years. For those of our Canadian friends, January 12th, Tim Horton, Canadian hockey player and founder of the Tim Hortons restaurant chain. January 19th, Tippi Hedren, known for playing Melanie Danielson in Hitchcock's The Birds. January 20th, Edwin Aldrin, better known as Buzz, who was the second man to step foot on the moon. And January 27th, Bobby Blue Bland, a rhythm and blues singer, Grammy Award winner, and inductee in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So lots of famous names born in this time, this month or so between these two films releasing.
Amazing.
And then the only notable death that I found in this time is December 31st, 1929, Charles Phelps Taft. And if anyone recognizes that last name, he is the brother of former President William Howard Taft. So I'd never heard of Charles himself, but obviously relative of the president, the name quickly jumps out to folks. So you said you had some Soviet Union history from this time period. What did you have?
It's just really come to mind because of this film that we've watched is set in, well, the Russian Empire. And unfortunately, around the time that this film was released, Stalin was cementing his personality in the Soviet Union in not very nice ways, but in ways that kind of, perhaps in retrospect, suggested where things might go. But I think it might be one of those things where you're looking back now and you can be like, oh my goodness, like how did, they must have been up in arms about this, but it probably seemed so early and practically at the time so normal for these kind of things to happen.
Yeah.
That it probably took a while before people realized that something not so great was happening in that area. So
yeah, so definitely a lot of things going on in the Soviet Union. I did find several other historical notes not related to the Soviet Union. There's a kind of a sad note on December 31st. A movie theater fire in Scotland resulted in the death of 69 children.
Oh my goodness.
Mostly not due to the fire itself, but because the fumes, lack of oxygen, suffocated, or being trampled and trying to escape. So obviously relevant to our conversation here because we're talking about movies, but I don't feel like we hear about things like that anymore. Obviously, there's a lot more regulations, and you've got to have the sprinklers and all those emergency systems in place nowadays in order to even build anything like that. But obviously, much less regulated at the time, and very, very sad there.
Well, we don't have flammable film anymore either.
That's true. Yeah, that certainly contributes as well.
Which is, not great. So, and it's probably built the sort of buildings are probably built of different materials.
Right.
So yes, thankfully, it's probably been a very long time since anything like this happened. But I've not heard of that tragedy, and that's awful.
Yeah. Then January 1st, 1930, as always, we had the Rose Bowl football game. The USC Trojans defeated the previously unbeaten Pittsburgh Panthers. Then another film related, sad film related thing. In January 2nd, there is a midair collision of two planes that were filming a scene for a movie called Such Men Are Dangerous, that collided and ended up killing, I think it was eight or 10 people, including the director and the cinematographer for the film. So, Such Men Are Dangerous was the title of the film, and obviously what they were doing was dangerous.
Yeah, and that's, gosh, 1930 did not get off to a brilliant start all round, did it?
No, no, definitely not. January 3rd, here's another piece. A fire in a storage room in the United States Capitol building, and I forget which episode it was we talked about just a few weeks ago on the podcast. There was in late 1929 at some point, I think it was in November, there was a fire in the White House. So I don't know what. Obviously, those buildings at that time were well over 100 years old, and but this fire, it said there wasn't any really structural damage. I guess a few records and things were damaged, but no major issues from that one.
Good, glad to hear it. Fire seems a really big problem at this time.
Absolutely. And then a couple of more positive notes. Well, I guess first one's kind of neutral. So January 7th, contract negotiations between Babe Ruth and the New York Yankees kicked off. The Yankees' initial offer for Ruth was a contract for 2 years at $75,000 per year, which I did some digging online, would be about 1.5 million per year today.
Wow.
And Yankees' current highest paid player, Aaron Judge, is getting $40 million a year. So those contracts have definitely changed over the last 100 years.
Yeah, there's been a bit of escalation in the pay, hasn't there? Yeah.
And then January 8th, in Italy, Crown Prince Umberto of Italy married Princess Marie Jose of Belgium. January 9th, Boston Bruins hockey team won their 14th straight game, setting a record which would stand until 1982, over 50 years later. January 13th, the first appearance of a comic strip adaptation of everyone's favorite Disney mouse, Mickey. And then the last note that I had, January 14th into the 15th, I guess it would have been overnight, the moon made its closest approach to Earth in the entire 20th century at 356,397 kilometers away from Earth. And the next time it's going to be that close won't be until 2257. So I don't think any of us are going to live to see
I'm gonna
that
miss
next.
that too. I mean, it's just rude, frankly. It's rude of the moon.
Yes. Yeah. And when I read that, I thought of, I feel like once a year at some point when there's a slow news day, there'll be a headline that I'll see, oh, how to see the upcoming supermoon.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, it's still going to look pretty much the same as it usually does. It's just a little bit close. It's not any noticeably closer to Earth than it is at any other time.
Well, I live at the coast, so it actually does make a difference here, but I think if you live in a city
Yeah.
or a town, yeah, it's difficult to see any difference whatsoever.
So anything else history-wise before we jump into the Rogue Song?
I think that's a pretty comprehensive covering of everything. I really just picked out the Soviet Union stuff because it sort of vaguely relates to the setting of the movie.
Sure. Well, let's jump into the film then. The Rogue Song was released on January 28th, 1930. Although I did see somewhere that it had a premiere at the Chinese Theater in LA a few weeks before that, but we're sticking with January 28th as the official date. It was directed by Lionel Barrymore with some uncredited direction from Hal Roach, which we'll get to in a little bit. It was based on a screenplay by John Colton and Francis Marion and based on the 1910 German operetta Gypsy Love by Franz Lehár.
It stars Lawrence Tibbett as Yegor, Catherine Dale Owen as Princess Vera, Nance O'Neill as Princess Alexandra, Judith Boselli as Tatiana, and Ulrich Haupt as Prince Sergei. It has a runtime of 103 minutes and was produced by Metro Goldwyn Mayer and distributed by Lowe's Inc.
And the only nomination the film received at this third Academy Awards was a Best Actor nomination for Tibbett. And unfortunately, the film is not currently available in its full form, but it does exist. The full audio does exist, and there's a pretty good recreation of the film on YouTube, which does include some of the surviving bits of the actual footage, as well as stills and other pieces to kind of stitched together as best a version of this film as we can get.
It is madness, to be totally honest, that they do not have a copy of this because it was MGM's first all talking technical film. You would have thought that was a kind of momentous thing to hang on to. And I think that's, they had bits of it intact until the 70s, but, they just ended up being lost. But it does strike me as absolutely beyond crazy that you do something like that. You put out your first ever all talking technical film and you just kind of leave it sitting in a drawer to decay.
Yeah. Yeah, so normally we do a pretty deep dive on the plot of the film, but because this one was a bit more of a reconstruction, it's for me at least, it was a little bit harder to follow than actually watching the actual film, I'm sure was.
I'm at an advantage on this point because my dad had he had well, we used to call them records back then, but they're called vinyl now because that's the cool thing to call them.
Yeah.
But my dad had the record of Way Out West. So it was just an audio recording of the film Way Out West. And so he listened to that quite a few times. And so I was at a slight advantage with it being mostly audio because I'm used to just visualizing something where the physical action should be.
Yeah, and there's actually a couple points where I was watching late at night, so I was using headphones while watching on the TV, and so as not to bother anyone. And the a couple times I actually just kind of averted my eyes and tried to listen a little bit instead of looking at the images. I mean, the recreation that's put together online, and I forget the YouTube username that took care of this, but it's quite good considering what we have, available of the film, but it's not the same as watching the actual film, so there were points where it's like, it's almost better with just the audio at this point.
Well, I mean, I think yes, probably. Who knows what that footage that we've got, that they've put in there,
Right.
it's not brilliant, is it? It's sort of doing its best, but it's not brilliant. So yes, I think if you can imagine, if you can do your best to imagine, that's the good thing.
So the story at a high level, we mentioned Igor, the typical character. He's a bandit leader, and fairly early in the film, he meets Princess Vera. They fall in love, but there's obviously can't have a nice, easy relationship going on here. And at some point later in the film, Prince Sergei is, I don't know if he's ever really accused or if Igor hears from his sister Nadja that Nadja was raped by Prince Sergei and she ends up killing herself. And then that leads Igor to seek some revenge and ends up killing Sergei in retribution for what happened with his sister.
Yes.
So now both guys have killed sister or have done things to sisters that have caused all of this death and obviously strains the relationship between Igor and Vera. And he ends up, I think, kidnapping her and kind of bringing her to live with the bandits. And I guess you could call it some level of servitude. Obviously, it was unclear to me whether she still loved him or not.
I think towards the end, she sort of admits that she does still love him, but the ultimate, I mean, massive spoilers, but the ultimate upshot of the film is that they're not going to be together, even though they do still love each other. I mean, this is a pre-code film. The Hays Code is not around yet, so it's got all of that stuff that you just simply wouldn't expect if you watched a movie, say 5 years later, 6 years later. You just wouldn't
Yes.
see things like, explicit reference to rape and kidnap. It's like you can have those things, but they've got to be so nuanced and very carefully managed.
Yep.
So yes, they do seem to still love each other at the end, but in quite typical. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about this film and the structure of it, but it's a sort of slightly bittersweet ending, I would say.
Yeah, and so I think it's unclear exactly how this happens because of how what we're missing here, but Vera does manage to trick Igor into being captured by the soldiers, governmental soldiers. They end up stringing him up in the town square and flogging him, whipping him, and I think was it the Laurel and Hardy characters that saw this and kind of reported back to the rest of the bandits that he had been killed?
They do this, yes. But at the very end, they hear his singing, so they know that that Ollie and Stana have got it wrong. They hear him singing through the kind of the mountains, I guess. Would have been. I mean, we don't see it, but I'm just imagining, what would have happened at the end there. We hear him sing. at the end there, and the sort of insinuation is that his men know that he's still alive, even though
Right.
Stan and Ollie have reported his death and have reported, in fact, that they are supposed to take over. Well, Ollie is supposed to take over in the chief position of the gang, which I can only imagine how wrong that could go. And indeed, he is just greeted with people laughing at him as if that's ever going to happen.
Right.
And just after that happens, we have this lovely, lovely song sort of cascading through that sort of suggests to me that the men can hear that he's still alive and that in fact he did survive.
And speaking of the singing, obviously Lawrence Tibbett was an opera singer before this, and I thought obviously the audio recording isn't great. It's great that we have it, but it's not the the best quality. But even with that, you could tell that he had a really strong voice. He,
Absolutely.
it doesn't seem like he was ultimately super successful. I mean, he did get obviously an Oscar nomination for this, but in terms of films, it doesn't seem like he had a ton that he was really well known for. But like I said, his voice was really strong. I would love to hear more of his singing. And there are, I think, some recordings of his singing that are available out there on compact disc. So it might be something that I want to dig into a little bit and find out more in terms of his actual singing career beyond what he did on screen.
I mean, I agree with you. I think despite the quality of the sounds, which possibly listeners are thinking, wait a minute, the sound isn't good and the visuals aren't good. What am I? It's still worth seeing this thing, I think. But it's obvious that his voice is he's got serious operatic pipes to be singing that way and to be navigating the notes that way. So I don't think that he, in film terms, did much else, although I'm very happy to be corrected on that. And the reason that I sort of think this might have been his sort of biggest accolade is that I read that he liked to show his friends this film.
Yeah.
So he was clearly very proud of it as an achievement. So it seems to me that you tend to probably, if you're going to show your friends a film you were in, you're probably going to show them the one that you think is, the best one.
Yeah, and so I'm just looking real quick on IMDb. So this was his first role, and he only has one, two, three. He's got 6 film credits. There's 2 other credits that he has, but one's they're both television series. So only 6 feature films that he was in, all in the 1930s. And I mean, he lived until I think he died in 1960. So he was around, and I think he did go back to acting on stage, and he did some traveling stage productions. But yeah, no lengthy film career, which was a little bit surprising. Although I did note one of the very first things that I noted as I was watching the reconstruction, he doesn't look like a film star. As we would normally think about it, you think of the film stars of that era, and he doesn't match the physical look of those stars. So I wonder if that had anything to do with it.
Quite possibly. I mean, obviously, this is billed as a Laurel and Hardy film. And it's because, obviously, as you just pointed out, this was his first film. So nobody knew him. There was no point putting him top billing because nobody knew who he was, really, in terms of film,
Right.
status. So he doesn't look like other film stars. But what I will say on that point is that we had lots of different looking film stars back then. And it's only really in very recent times that it's become more homogenous. I mean, there's been a lot of column inches dedicated to this idea that everyone's face in Hollywood is slowly starting to look very similar. Whereas if you go back sort of 50, 60 years, there were people of all shapes and sizes and face shapes as well. So maybe he got some more film roles because you could be different back then. You could look a bit different. You didn't have to look like everybody else.
Yeah. And actually, I mean, just kind of going through all of the actors that appear in this, or kind of the top line actors, the main roles, the ones that had the longest film careers and the most credits to their name were Laurel and Hardy. A lot of the Catherine Dale Owen plays the Princess Vera. I only saw 9 film credits for her, although one of the film credits for her was in that film I mentioned earlier, Such Men Are Dangerous, that had the plane crash. So interesting connection there.
Mm.
The Nance O'Neill, who played Princess Alexandra, fairly lengthy silent film career, but it didn't appear that she extended that into a ton of sound films.
Quite common for that to happen in the very,
Yeah, yeah,
very sort of Lena Lamont Singing in the Rain kind of thing. You may look great
Right.
on screen, but can you act with your voice? It's a good question, and for some people, it wasn't possible for them to make the transference over to sound.
Yeah, so I think hers was probably the lengthiest film career. Ulrich Haupt, who was Prince Serge, or Sergei rather, he passed away a few years after this, so he didn't appear in much after this one. So yeah, I mean, Laurel and Hardy, you mentioned they were billed as kind of the attraction in this because a lot of the other people weren't that well known.
And I mean, by that point, they were exceedingly well known. So, yes, you're gonna. I
Yeah.
mean, it's in that respect, Hollywood hasn't changed much. It always tries to use names to get people to the box office. So
Right.
it's sort of it was good common sense for them to bill it that way, because it hopefully meant that a lot of people went to see it, and hopefully it also meant that people weren't too disappointed when they came out and realized how little Laurel and Hardy were in it.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's important that we touch on that too. I mean, what I read was that they were basically an afterthought in this, and I mentioned at the top the uncredited direction from Hal Roach. Basically, Hal Roach came in with Laurel and Hardy and directed those scenes that they appear in, which were kind of dropped into the film after the fact, after they'd already started shooting the rest of the story because things weren't going the way MGM wanted them to go for the film overall. So they said, "Oh, let's bring in these guys that everybody knows, and we can throw them up on the marquee, basically."
Yeah, and even from the sound, this is how engrossed in this kind of Laurel and Hardy universe I was as a kid, I guess, thanks to my dad. Like, even from the sound version of this, I can tell that Hal Roach is directing them. It's just really, really funny because they just have a different rhythm to the majority of the rest of the film, and it's not just the script. It's not just the
Yeah.
fact that they're light relief. There's actually a whole different rhythm to their scenes. So, yeah, I'm not surprised that MGM were kind of freaking out about it, especially if it was their first Technicolor all talking film. And they will have really wanted that to be a hit, and dropping somebody in like Laurel and Hardy would have seemed like a obvious way of covering over any sins, shall we say.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny too. I think the one moment or maybe two moments that I actually had a chuckle at the film obviously were the Laurel and Hardy scenes. That's what they're there for. I think the one was when
Absolutely.
they do the little bit with the bear in the cave, which I
Yes,
think was one of the segments that actually survives in actual footage,
it
if I
did
remember correctly.
survive, yes. Yes, it was the bee that got me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that one, and the person who recreated it has kind of put together that animation, I think,
Yes.
from other Laurel and Hardy films that
Yes.
where they've done that same bit, and that was the other thing that I found interesting was that a lot of the Laurel and Hardy segments were just bits that they'd already done elsewhere dropped into this film, essentially.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, I suppose it's that from a cynical point of view, it's them not wanting to have to reinvent the wheel when they're just doing these little bit segments in this movie. It's not like it's one of their movies, that they are starring in.
Right.
But it's really funny how it does alter it structurally. It alters the mood of it. I'm not sure whether you've ever heard, I mean, most people have at this point, Steven Spielberg talking about filming of Lost Ark, which is a film that I'm not actually that fond of, for exactly the reason that Steven Spielberg kind of worried about it, because he says, you shoot some light stuff, you shoot some dark stuff, and you see what you got at the end, and then you get it to the editing studio and you realize it's mostly dark. And they will have probably, as they were filming this, thinking, oh, okay, somebody gets kidnapped and somebody gets raped and somebody gets strangled. And maybe we should have something that is not any of those things and bring in, who do we bring in under those circumstances? Who have we got? Who's on the books? Laurel and Hardy, bring them in.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it if that's exactly how those conversations went. And obviously we kind of skip right to the actors. We haven't touched on any of the directors, the writers, or anything. We've talked about Lionel Barrymore on the podcast before. We covered his film Madam X that on the previous season of the Oscars. He also showed up as a director in one of the segments in the Hollywood Review of 1929. And he'll come up once more at the next Oscars, where he will actually win a Best Acting award for, and I forget which film that was for, but I did note down that he is a Best Actor winner at the fourth Academy Awards. So we'll touch on him again. Obviously, family name, very successful Hollywood. Anything you want to touch on about Lionel Barrymore?
Not so much him, because I have to say, my attention was quite distracted in this film by Judith Vaselli, who plays Tatiana. She's the woman who, in the beginning, he, inverted commas, steals the pearls from. He does not steal the pearls. She gives them over to him, and she is sort of slightly hamming it up, and but she's doing it in such a wonderful way. And so she really distracted me from almost everyone else involved with this film. She says something along the lines of, "What are pearls compared to a moment in life when one isn't bored?" And I just think that is one of the best lines ever written into a film. Can just imagine she's just always bored, this character, and she wants, basically Lawrence Tibbet's character is an amusement to her.
Yeah.
So the way Judith Vaselli was playing that part just had me captivated from the very first moment she came on screen. And as such, I have worryingly small amounts to say about anybody else because she just stole my attention so much.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too in terms of the script of the film was I mentioned John Colton and Frances Marion. Frances Marion, we actually just talked about last week, the film Their Own Desire, a previous film that we talked about, and that was one where there was some female agency in the film, which I'm sure some of that came from having a woman as one of the writers, and I thought there was some of that in this film as well, at least based on what we get to hear of the audio.
Yeah, absolutely.
And obviously, you mentioned that character, that princess is, she's bored with the man. She's doing her own thing. She doesn't care what else is going on around her.
It's really interesting to see so many female characters in this film, and not all of them are tragic kind of, figures. His sister is, and to a certain extent, the lead characters. But I guess what I liked about Tatiana is that she was very much not a tragic figure. She was just like her own little whirlwind. She reminded me of a precursor to the kind of screwball comedy female characters. And that kind of energy where it's like, I'm just gonna do what I want, and, yeah, I don't really care about the consequences, which, of course, is not gonna a good philosophy for real life, but for film purposes, it can be very entertaining.
For film, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But it's really, really interesting to, just think about the director and, like you say, the fact that, he's from this family and he's got this whole trajectory in front of him, and he doesn't even, obviously we know it, he doesn't. So it's really fascinating to think that this is where things sort of started to unfurl for him.
It's always interesting to see some of those and build those connections. I really enjoy doing that. The other fun connection that I found in doing a little bit of research on Hal Roach, as a young boy, he worked as a newspaper delivery boy, and one of his customers was none other than Mark Twain. So
Wow.
again, interesting writing connection there.
Hugely. That is really cool. I mean, not many people can say that they've had Mark Twain as a customer.
I deliver newspapers to Mark Twain. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's I don't think the first thing I told anyone, I think.
And Hal Roach actually lived until 1992 and died at the age of 100. So obviously he wasn't working all of that time, but well lived, long life for Mr. Hal Roach.
Yeah, very impressive.
Let's see. I think I've covered most of what I have on the folks involved. Anyone else you wanted? Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I did have one other tidbit. Nance O'Neill, the one who plays Princess Alexandra, apparently, and I just saw this in one spot, so I don't absolutely know if this is true. But in 1904, she met and ran into and eventually had a friendship with none other than Lizzie Borden in Boston.
Wow, my goodness.
So I don't know what to make of that, but it was an interesting little tidbit that jumped out at me.
Very interesting. I'll have to look into that and see just how true this is. It's very interesting though, isn't it?
So obviously we mentioned the operetta at the top, Gypsy Love, Franz Lehrer, in originally from Germany. I guess from what I read, the film retains a couple of the songs. I'm not sure exactly which ones were retained, but obviously many of the songs that appear in the film, most of which are actually sung by Tibbet. I don't think there's one maybe where the princess sings along with him,
Yeah, if yeah,
but I might
maybe
be
one.
mistaken there. And then there's obviously the ballet scene that they have the footage for.
Yes.
That's just kind of the orchestra, but I
Yes.
think most of the songs are Tibbet singing everything.
I think so. I mean, he's certainly got the voice for it. I mean, if you had hired him as an actor in a romance musical and you don't use him to sing most of the songs, I think something has gone a bit wrong there.
Yeah.
So I think you're not using your strengths, are you? So yeah, he's and as we say, he's just really, really he's impressive as a singer. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else you wanted to touch on about the film itself? Anyone involved or anything before we get into some of the reviews and what people think of it?
I don't think so in terms of the people involved, but definitely have lots to do with lots of interest in the how it was received.
Yeah, so the only review that I was able to find from the time, it was writer Martin Dickstein from the Brooklyn Eagle in
Yes.
1930, right after it came out. He wrote, "It's a romance of a kind that has, or should have, gone out of style years ago, and its music is several thick cuts below brilliance." And
Oh.
then he went on to say, the Rogue Song is hardly a composition of such merit as to deserve the distinction of serving as Mr. Tibbitt's first vehicle before the movie microphones." So Mr. Dixon did not appreciate this film. I think it's safe to say he thinks that Tibbett deserved a better film to showcase his talent, as especially as his debut on film. But yeah, it was he was not a fan. It's pretty clear.
It seems that people thought it was slow, and yes, they weren't particularly praising of the music, which I think is really harsh. I think it's fine, like, and no, okay, it's probably not going to be one of those musicals that goes down in history as one of the best musicals ever recorded. Not everything is the Rocky Horror Show, but it's like it's I mean, you can't replicate stuff like that. It's just that I guess maybe people had quite a lot of choice when it came to film. Movie going was a huge pastime, and maybe this one just looked like out of all of those, it just looked like a bit of a limp squid, which is a shame because I do think there's some merit to it. I certainly chuckled a few times,
Yeah.
and I do think his singing is good, regardless of what you think of the actual songs.
Yeah, no, the performance is good, and I think that dovetails with the comment that the reviewer says. He wishes that there was a better. Basically, say he wishes the songs were better to really showcase Tibbett's
Yeah.
voice and his abilities there.
Yeah, and I just can imagine that some people were kind of like, Lauren coming out of the cinema, particularly in Britain, I can just imagine that, "Well, Lauren Hardy were barely in it." That kind of reaction. It's a bit like going to see Scream for Drew Barrymore. You're not gonna come out of the cinema particularly, particularly pleased that you did
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
it's just yeah, I can just sort of particularly over here, I can just imagine people coming out extremely disgruntled, thinking that they'd gone to see a Laurel Hardy film and had actually been tricked into seeing a romantic musical starring Lawrence Tibbett. But I don't think they were shortchanged. I think they were just disgruntled because it wasn't what they were expecting.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's I mean, we see that a lot of times today. A lot of audience reviews, especially, it depends on what you are expecting going in. If you're expecting kind of a silly, goofy movie, and that's what you get, then you might give it a higher rating than if you go in expecting silly and goofy, and you end up with a romantic drama or something completely out of the ordinary.
I mean, I'm no different to anyone else. If you wanna really annoy me, missell a film to me. I mean, that is the way that you'll get me really angry coming out of the coming out of the cinema. I'm just like, "Well, they said it was this, and it wasn't." So it's just I do understand that kind of feeling that they may have had coming out of the cinema then that, they were sort of maybe felt they were missold the film a bit.
Yeah. And then the more modern take on it, writer Phil Hall, who was writing on a website called cinemacrazed.com. He said, "If an extant version of the Rogue Song turns up, it could surprise everyone by being far superior than the surviving fragments may suggest.
Uh-huh.
In any event, its absence makes us wish that the film industry was more prescient when it came to preserving its golden age productions." I couldn't
Yeah.
agree more with that. I have a feeling that it's better than what we have, but I'm not sure it's like you said, it's not the best musical ever, but I'm sure it's probably better in its full version than what we have
Of
existing today.
course. Yeah, I mean, this has been an ongoing issue for many, many years now. And when I was running the magazine, it was something we actually wrote articles about, and not just because, Keanu Reeves made a whole documentary side by side about it, but it's just a huge issue in the film industry. I mean, possibly not so much now that they've moved to digital, but still digital formats also they become obsolete. So they do need to
Yeah.
find ways to preserve these films, and it is quite heartbreaking how many of them, from the silent era till sort of the sort of 40s, you can find evidence of lost films, and it just seems incredible to me that somebody went to the effort of budgeting, casting, producing, setting a movie, acting in a movie, and then it just gets lost. So I agree with this critic wholeheartedly, yes.
Any other critics, either of the time or modern folks that you had? Did you find anything?
I could besides the ones that you pulled up, I could only find, sort of a generic roundup that said actually about Laurel and Hardy's role that they felt it was disconnected from the main operetta plot. Well, no surprise there, considering it was just dropped in by
Yeah.
MGM when they were worried about how the film was gonna do, and people felt it served as more of an afterthought. It's like, yeah, no kidding. I mean, it's so the thing about that is that it's so obvious that people can see through that. When studios do that, when they drop something into a movie because they're worried about it, or when they change the ending because they're worried about it, people who go to the cinema and enjoy cinema, they can see through that a mile off. They know. They can see the studio's hand in a film. And it turns out in the 1930s, that was no different. People were like, this is so, their roles are so disconnected from everything else. What is going on here? And the answer was MGM.
Yeah, and I think that's important to note that yeah, and I feel like we see this a lot more at the time. Obviously, we still see it today, but we see it more at the time where studios especially felt like they a lot of times they had to hold the hands of the audience. Obviously, we're coming out of the period where you had the title cards, but even in some of the sound films in the late 1929, early 1930 period that I'm in right now, there's still title cards, and they're still using things. Like they'll show a hand writing a letter that they're going to send, and it'll sit on the shot will sit on that title card or on that letter or whatever newspaper clipping for much longer than we would probably need to be able to skim through it and kind of understand what's going on.
Mhm.
And so it felt like a lot of times there certain obviously certain directors didn't do that, but certain directors were still really holding the hand of the audience to make sure that people understood. And I think that's people understood probably better than the filmmakers thought at sometimes.
Yeah, I think the people making movies then, would they were a lot of them had been making movies since the infancy of film, and thus it was a completely new medium, and they was just in this habit, as you say, of absolutely 100% holding the audience's members' hand now. No, this is a film. Here are the actors. Here are the characters. Here's what's going on.
Yeah.
And it's like I think it takes a while. It doesn't just turn to sound and technical, and then all of a sudden we know how to make new movies. It's a transition period, like anything in any industry is, and this is definitely one of those films where it was still a bit stuck in that zone of holding the hand too much.
Yep. So at the Oscars, as I mentioned at the top, the Rogue Song did receive just one nomination at the Third Academy Awards. It was for Lawrence Tibbett. Imagine getting a Oscar nomination on your very first film role like he did.
Not too bad.
Obviously, he did not win. No, he and Wallace Beery were the only nominees in that category that only had one film nominated. So obviously, we've already touched on several of the other films that were nominated in this. Ronald Coleman in Bulldog Drummond and Condemned, George Arliss in Disraeli. We've got George Arliss's other film, Green Goddess, coming up, and we've already talked about Maurice Chevalier in The Love Parade. Again, it's hard for me to compare this performance with all those others that I've seen so far and will be seeing for this year of the podcast, but I have trouble putting this performance overall over any of those other ones simply because it's so incomplete.
Of course. I mean, we just don't have an even a sort of an area to judge from, really, a standpoint to judge from, because we're just looking at fragments. So it's
Yeah.
impossible to know what his performance was really like in that movie. But it is, if anything, he got a nomination, and that's something that you'd just really proudly carry forward, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the closest that I can compare it to, because it's one of the more recent ones that I've seen, The Love Parades, Maurice Chevalier, that's another musical film where he does a lot of singing in that. I think that there's less he doesn't carry the songs in that movie as much as Lawrence Tibbett does in this film.
Mm.
So again, that may have something to do with it, but definitely the singing itself is comparable between those two films. And I think if we're just going based on the singing, I would definitely agree that he's right up there with the rest of the actors in this category. But again, it's just so incomplete. It's hard to make that determination.
Yeah, and also it's very difficult to kind of deconstruct the logic of the academy, I think, back then and now. It's just
Right.
very, very difficult to deconstruct that and understand exactly how that decision is made.
Well, I did before we give some final ratings. I did also want to mention I brought it up I think once early on, but I haven't really talked about it. So one of the longer segments that does survive is a ballet sequence, kind of right smack dab in the middle of the film, and I actually thought that was probably one of the most impressive parts that does survive. I'm glad we get to see that, especially because there's no dialogue. It's just the action on the screen in that sequence.
It's really funny, this whole film and that, like, that kinda dance in the middle there. I mean, I'm watching this film. In a past life, I used to teach English in schools for my sins, and a lot of we taught a lot of the Elizabethan plays, Shakespeare included. And I'm watching this, and I'm just thinking about how much it has in common with these Elizabethan dramas that I used to teach, including things like a song and dance number, right smack in the middle of what you'd think was like quite a crucial point. I mean,
Yeah.
the actual central character, Lawrence Tibbett, is about to come in and sing a song about how his sister died. But before we do that, we're just going to pause for some ballet. You're like, okay, all right, yeah. And structurally and thematically, this sort of moment really cemented it for me as really this thing, whether MGM realized it or not, actually has the structure of an Elizabethan drama. You've got all the sort of genre blending stuff with like the tragedy, comedy, romance, operatic singing, slapstick from Laurel and Hardy. So you've got all that genre blending that happens in Elizabethan drama. You've got love across class and social barriers. You've got revenge and honor themes. You've got like the noble world versus the rustic world, like moral ambiguity. You've got music as an emotional and thematic expression. So and that ballet sequence is just it just reminds me of those Elizabethan dramas where you just suddenly have a dance, before Macbeth goes off to kill loads of people, he's just going to have a feast. So, okay, fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's nice. And there's going to be dancing at the feast. Okay, fine. Yeah, that's lovely. So, and the Laurel and Hardy characters are kind of those comic servants or fools or Falstaffs of the piece. And I think to people, who are not thinking on those terms, it does seem quite a random addition to suddenly have ballet in the middle of all this. But to me, because I could see the structure and I don't know if MGM had any clue that they were doing this or whether they just kind of used a formula that was based on this and they didn't even realize where the formula came from. But it has this really strange parallel with Elizabethan/Shakespearean drama pieces, and the ballet is, to me, one of the sort of symbolic moments of that. So what did you think of it?
Yeah, no, I like I said, I had not dug that deep on kind of the structure and all of that, but it makes perfect sense. And it did feel, despite how much I enjoyed seeing that segment in the middle of the film, it did feel a little bit, as you said, out of place. And also, as you were talking, I was kind of thinking the Laurel and Hardy characters do remind me a little bit of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
Yes, that's who they are.
Yeah, that's very, very, and I think that was, I mean, it feels like that's kind of their place in general, so I'm sure in a larger perspective, outside beyond just this film, that's kind of what they were going for oftentimes, but
Absolutely.
I thought they really kind of fell into that type of role in this film.
Absolutely. And it's weird, isn't it? Because they just kind of threw them in at the last minute, but somehow
Yeah.
that only makes it more like an Elizabethan drama.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm it's been a while since I've read, that play, but I feel like most of the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern scenes are just kind of them. They drop in,
That's it.
do a couple pages, and then they disappear again.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happens with Laurel and Hardy here.
It is. It's like, and now for some comic relief. Here they are. There they go. So it's very much like that. And the ballet is a sort of similar light relief moment because we are about to hear him sing a song about his dead sister. And we are about to then, after that, watch him strangle someone. So before all that, let's have some ballet.
Well, on that note, let's move on to giving some final thoughts and some ratings on the film. If I'm being honest, I hate to even give this any sort of number rating because technically it's incomplete. Would be my grade for it. But
Yeah.
if I do have to give it a rating, I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 10. There were some
Mhm.
some things that did kind of encourage me about it, but again, it's just so hard to truly make a determination on this. We can't really look at the cinematography. We can get a sense for kind of the production design and the sets and all that, but it's not the same as looking at the actual footage. The one kind of highest point that I probably noted was some of the costumes were really impressive. Again, those are easier to see in still images and some of the stuff that we get.
Yes.
But those Russian military uniforms, the hats, the dresses on the women, I thought were pretty good. So again, I might go even higher on that if I had seen the actual film, but
Yes.
I think I'm gonna go right middle of the road, 5 out of 10.
Okay. Well, I understand that. I think I'm going to go one higher and go 6, and partially because I enjoyed relishing it as that kind of rehash of the Elizabethan template, and partially because I do think there's something quite important about the ending of this film and in relation to its historical context. Obviously, this comes in 1930. People are dealing with the fallout of the crash, and in the end, these 2 people, they love each other, but they decide they cannot stay together, and so it feels like, "Oh, is that gonna be the ending?" But then the last part of the ending is him singing and his men hearing that through everything he survived, and to me, that left me on a note of feeling like in these times that we're living in, i.e. 1930, you can't hope for great love and great adventure and riches. The best we can ask for is to survive. That kind of idea popped into my head as I heard him singing out the final moments of the movie. So I did think there was a sort of poignant contemporary message at the end. So I'm going to go with 6.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note too. I was just looking back at the production information that we have. So the film was began shooting August 29th of 1929,
Mhm.
and the principal photography on it ended October 11th. So
Uh-huh.
literally days before things started going south on the stock market in October and into November of 1929, they had wrapped this. So they shot the entire thing
Not
in a
even
time of
needing lots of
prosperity,
it.
and then they're releasing it 3
Yeah.
months later in a time where they had all these losses. So I think it's important you bring up it's great to bring up that it's important to see this in the context of what's going on in the greater world.
It's amazing that they can make a film like that, just ahead of something like that happening. But also, I wonder, albeit nothing happened big until just after closing shoot, I think, people feel something, about their climate, their about their society, maybe before anything concrete happens, and maybe some of that uneasiness gets worked into things, particularly art. So it's interesting that they managed to make something with a message that was going to probably resonate, even though, as we know, reviews at the time are not brilliant. I still think it tells us a little something about that era.
Absolutely. Well, as always, I will include a list of resources, links to any of the articles and the reviews that we mentioned, as well as where you can watch the reconstruction of the Rogue Song on YouTube for yourself. Helen, thanks again so much for coming on to talk about the Rogue Song. Remind people where they can find your work one more time.
Thanks, Jonathan. It's been lovely. So I write the Movies of Note newsletter, which is at thejoanwilder.substack.com. If you don't know what that means, you really should, because it's a Romancing the Stone reference. Go and watch it now if you haven't already.
And don't forget to follow the Oscar Project at theoscarproject.substack.com. And be sure to come back for next Friday's episode of the podcast where I will be discussing the film Street of Chance. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you at the movies.